Captain Rebecca Becca Holland had learned to ignore the stares. They always came in the same pattern. First, people would look at her face, pretty enough, with high cheekbones and green eyes that her mother used to say sparkled like emeralds. Then their gaze would shift, inevitably, to the jagged scar that ran from her right temple down to her jawline, a pale lightning bolt against her sun-touched skin. And then would come the questions, or worse, the whispers. She felt those stares now as she walked across the tarmac at Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. It was a hot September morning, the kind where the air shimmered above the concrete and the sun felt like a physical weight on your shoulders. She carried her duffel bag over one shoulder and her service cap under her arm, her uniform crisp despite the heat. This was her new assignment. Flight instructor, training the next generation of Air Force pilots. It should have felt like an honor. At 32, she was young for the position. She had flown combat missions in Afghanistan and Iraq, accumulated over 2,000 flight hours, and earned commendations for valor. On paper, she was exactly what the Air Force needed. But Becca knew the truth. This wasn't a promotion. It was a parking lot. They had grounded her 6 months ago after the incident. Temporary reassessment, they called it. A psychological evaluation to ensure she was fit for duty. She had passed every test, every interview, every hurdle they put in front of her, and still, they wouldn't let her fly combat missions anymore. So here she was, teaching kids barely out of college how to handle a T-38 Talon, when she should have been in the cockpit of an F-16, doing the job she was born to do. The base commander's office was in a squat, utilitarian building that looked like every other military office building Becca had ever seen. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, the faint smell of old coffee and copy machine toner. Colonel Patricia Vance was waiting for her. The colonel was in her mid-50s, with iron gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and the kind of posture that suggested a steel rod had replaced her spine. Her desk was immaculate, everything at right angles, not a single paper out of place. "Captain Holland," Colonel Vance said, not rising. "Have a seat." Becca sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Colonel Vance studied her for a long moment, her gaze lingering on the scar. Becca kept her expression neutral. She had learned not to flinch under scrutiny. "I've reviewed your file," the colonel said finally. Impressive record. "Multiple combat deployments. Distinguished Flying Cross. You should be proud." "Thank you, ma'am. However," the colonel leaned back in her chair, "I want to be clear about expectations here. You're an instructor now, not a combat pilot. Your job is to teach, to guide, to ensure these young officers are prepared for the challenges ahead. This is not about your personal glory or proving something to yourself." Becca felt heat rise in her chest, but kept her voice level. "I understand, ma'am. Do you?" Colonel Vance's eyes narrowed. "Because your psychological evaluation suggested you might have some difficulty adjusting to a non-combat role, that you might push too hard, take unnecessary risks." "With respect, ma'am, I disagree with that assessment." "Your disagreement is noted." The colonel's tone made it clear the conversation was over. "You'll start tomorrow. Report to Major Blackwell in flight operations at 0600. Dismissed." Becca stood, saluted, and left before she said something she would regret. The bachelor officer quarters were as impersonal as expected. A narrow room with a single bed, a desk, a closet, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. Becca unpacked methodically, hanging her uniforms, organizing her toiletries, placing the small framed photo of her younger brother Danny on the nightstand. Danny grinned up at her from the photo, his face full of mischief and joy. He had been 19 in that picture, home on leave from his first deployment. He had looked so proud in his Army uniform, so ready to take on the world. That had been 8 years ago. Becca touched the frame gently, then turned away. She didn't let herself think about Danny too often. When she did, the grief was still sharp enough to cut. That evening, she went to the Officers' Club for dinner. It was a typical military bar and grill, with dark wood paneling, photos of aircraft on the walls, and a long bar where a handful of officers nursed beers and swapped stories. Becca ordered a burger and a Coke and found a table in the corner. She was halfway through her meal when she heard the laughter. "Did you see the new instructor?" a male voice said, loud enough to carry across the room. "The one with the scar?" Becca's hand tightened on her fork, but she didn't look up. "Yeah, I saw her," another voice replied. "What do you think happened?" "Car accident? Bar fight?" More laughter. "I heard she washed out of combat ops," a third voice chimed in. "Couldn't handle the pressure. Probably had a breakdown or something." "Well, she sure looks like she's been through the ringer. That scar is nasty." Becca set down her fork carefully. She could feel eyes on her now, people turning to look, wondering if she had heard. Of course she had heard. They had meant for her to hear. She took a long drink of her Coke, finished her burger in 3 quick bites, and stood. She walked past the group of officers, 3 men in their late 20s, probably instructors themselves, without looking at them. "Hey, Captain," one of them called out. "Didn't mean any offense. Just curious about the scar. That's all." Becca stopped, turned, looked at the speaker, a sandy-haired captain with a cocky grin and pilot wings on his chest. "Captain Ryan Mitchum," she said, reading his name tape. "I'll remember that." The grin faltered slightly. "It was just a joke." "I'm sure it was." Becca's voice was flat. "Have a good evening, gentlemen." She walked out before they could respond. The next morning, Becca reported to flight operations at 05:45, 15 minutes early. Major Gerald Blackwell was already there, a coffee cup in one hand and a clipboard in the other. He was in his early 40s, balding, with the tired eyes of a man who had seen too many young pilots make too many stupid mistakes. "Captain Holland," he said, shaking her hand. "Welcome to the instructor cadre. I'll be honest with you, we're stretched thin right now. Budget cuts, personnel shortages, the usual story. So we're throwing you in the deep end." "I can handle it, sir." "I'm sure you can." His gaze flicked to her scar, then away. "Your first class starts in an hour. 6 students, all second lieutenants fresh out of flight school. They're green but eager. Your job is to keep them alive and turn them into competent pilots." "Yes, sir." "One more thing." Major Blackwell set down his coffee. "I don't care what you did before you got here. I don't care about your combat record or your medals or anything else. Here, you're an instructor. That means patience, discipline, and making sure these kids learn from their mistakes without killing themselves in the process. Clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." "Good. Your students are waiting in Briefing Room 3. Briefing Room 3 was small and sterile, with a whiteboard at the front and 6 desks arranged in 2 rows. 6 young officers sat at those desks, all of them looking nervous and excited in equal measure, 5 men and 1 woman. All of them in their early 20s, all of them staring at Becca's scar. She walked to the front of the room and wrote her name on the whiteboard in block letters. "Capt. Rebecca Holland." "Good morning," she said, turning to face them. "I'm Captain Holland, and I'll be your primary flight instructor for the next 12 weeks. By the end of this course, you'll have logged 50 flight hours in the T-38 Talon and demonstrated proficiency in basic and advanced flight maneuvers." One of the students, a young man with red hair and freckles, raised his hand. "Ma'am, have you flown combat missions?" "Yes. Can you tell us about it?" "No." Becca's voice was firm. "This course is about teaching you to fly, not entertaining you with war stories. If you want to hear about combat, read a book." The red-haired student's face flushed, but he nodded. Another student spoke up, a tall, athletic-looking man with dark hair and a confident smile. His name tape read Morrison. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, how did you get that scar?" The room went silent. Becca had heard this question 1,000 times. She had prepared a dozen different answers, each one designed to deflect, to minimize, to end the conversation quickly. But looking at these 6 young faces, she felt tired. Tired of deflecting, tired of protecting other people's comfort at the expense of her own dignity. "I got it serving my country," she said simply. "Any other questions about my appearance, or can we move on to the syllabus?" Morrison's smile faded. "Sorry, ma'am. No disrespect intended, and yet you showed it anyway." Becca turned back to the whiteboard. "Let's talk about stall recovery procedures." The first week passed in a blur of classroom instruction and simulator time. The students were competent but raw, full of enthusiasm and short on judgment. Becca found herself constantly correcting their mistakes, drilling them on procedures, pushing them to think 3 steps ahead. It was exhausting work, but she was good at it. Teaching came naturally to her, and she took satisfaction in watching her students improve. But the whispers continued. In the hallways, in the commissary, at the gym, people talked about the scarred captain who had washed out of combat operations. They speculated about what had happened to her, what she had done to earn that mark on her face. Some of the stories were almost funny. She had been in a dogfight and barely ejected in time. She had been in a motorcycle accident. She had been in a bar fight in Kabul. Other stories were crueler. She had cracked under pressure. She had disobeyed orders and gotten people killed. She had been dishonorably discharged, and this was her last chance. Becca heard them all and said nothing. She had learned long ago that defending yourself only made the gossip worse, but it wore on her. Every day, a little more. On Friday evening, she was leaving the gym when she encountered Captain Mitchum again. He was with 2 other instructors, both men, all of them in PT gear. "Captain Holland," Mitchum said, his tone friendly. "How's your first week going?" "Fine, thank you." "Listen, about the other night at the club," he had the grace to look embarrassed. "I wanted to apologize." "That was out of line." Becca studied him. He seemed sincere, but she had learned not to trust sincerity too easily. "Apology accepted," she said. "Good." Mitchum grinned. "Maybe we could grab a beer sometime, bury the hatchet properly?" "I don't drink." "Coffee, then." Becca shouldered her gym bag. "I appreciate the offer, Captain, but I prefer to keep my professional and personal lives separate." She walked away before he could respond. Behind her, she heard one of the other instructors mutter, "Ice Queen." Becca kept walking. She had been called worse. The second week brought the students' first actual flights. Becca sat in the rear cockpit of the T-38, her hands resting lightly on the controls, ready to take over if needed. In the front seat, Lieutenant Morrison gripped the stick like he was trying to strangle it. "Relax your grip," Becca said through the intercom. "You're not fighting the aircraft. You're dancing with it." "Yes, ma'am." Morrison's voice was tight with concentration. They were at 8,000 feet. The Texas landscape spread out below them in shades of brown and green. The sky was clear, the air smooth. Perfect conditions for a first flight. "All right, Morrison, take us through a standard rate turn to the left. 30 degrees of bank." Morrison pushed the stick left. The T-38 rolled smoothly, the horizon tilting. "Good," Becca said. "Now hold that bank angle. Watch your altitude." She could see Morrison's head moving, scanning the instruments, trying to process all the information at once. The nose started to drop. "Altitude," Becca warned. Morrison pulled back on the stick, overcorrecting. The nose came up too fast. "Gently," Becca said. "Small inputs. The T-38 is responsive. You don't need to manhandle it." By the end of the hour, Morrison was sweating and exhausted, but he had completed the basic maneuvers. When they landed, he climbed out of the cockpit looking both exhilarated and humbled. "That was harder than I expected," he admitted. "It always is," Becca said. "But you did well for your first time. Next flight, we'll work on your instrument scan. You're focusing too much on one instrument at a time. You need to develop a flow." "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you, ma'am." Over the next few weeks, Becca flew with each of her students multiple times. She discovered that Lieutenant Sarah Yates, the only woman in the class, had excellent spatial awareness, but struggled with emergency procedures. Lieutenant Marcus Chen had natural stick and rudder skills, but was overconfident. Lieutenant Rodriguez was methodical and careful, sometimes too careful, and Morrison was talented but reckless. He pushed boundaries, tested limits, always trying to prove he was the best in the class. It reminded Becca of herself at that age, before she had learned that courage and stupidity were often separated by a very thin line. One afternoon, after a particularly aggressive maneuver, Becca took control of the aircraft. "My controls," she said sharply. "Your controls?" Morrison responded. Releasing the stick, Becca leveled the aircraft and brought them back to straight and level flight. Then she keyed the intercom. "Lieutenant Morrison, what you just did was dangerous and unnecessary. You exceeded the aircraft's operating limits and put both of us at risk. Do you understand that?" "Yes, ma'am. I was just trying to—" "I know what you were trying to do. You were trying to impress me. You were trying to show me you're not afraid." Becca's voice was hard. But bravery without judgment isn't courage. It's foolishness. And foolishness gets people killed. There was a long silence. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Morrison said finally. "It won't happen again. Make sure it doesn't. Because if it does, you'll wash out of this program and all your talent won't matter." When they landed, Morrison was subdued. He apologized again, more sincerely this time. Becca accepted the apology but filed a formal incident report anyway. Rules were rules, and Morrison needed to learn that actions had consequences. That evening, Major Blackwell called her into his office. "I read your report on Lieutenant Morrison," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "You think he's a problem?" "Think he's talented but undisciplined. He needs to learn restraint. He's also the top student in his class. Senator Morrison's son, too, if you didn't know." Becca felt her jaw tighten. "I didn't know, and it doesn't matter. He violated flight safety protocols." "I'm not asking you to ignore it," Blackwell said. "I'm just saying, be aware of the politics. The senator is on the Armed Services Committee. If his son washes out, there will be questions. Then the senator should have raised his son to follow rules." Blackwell almost smiled. "I like you, Holland. You've got integrity, just be careful. Politics and the military don't always play nice together." "I'll keep that in mind, sir." The gossip about Becca's scar intensified as the weeks went on. Someone started a rumor that she had gotten it in a training accident caused by her own mistake. Someone else claimed she had been injured during a mental breakdown. The stories grew more elaborate, more cruel. Becca tried to ignore them, but it was getting harder. She could see the way other instructors looked at her now, the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. Even her students seemed uncertain around her, as if they weren't sure whether to trust her. Only Lieutenant Yates seemed unaffected. After one particularly difficult flight, Yates approached Becca in the hangar. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Lieutenant." "The rumors about you, are they true?" Becca looked at the young woman. Yates had an honest face, open and direct. She deserved an honest answer. "Which rumors are we talking about?" Becca asked. "That you had a breakdown? That you're not fit to fly anymore?" "No," Becca said firmly. "Those rumors are not true. I'm here because the Air Force decided I would be more valuable as an instructor than as a combat pilot. I disagreed with that decision, but I follow orders." "What about the scar?" "What about it? How did you get it?" Becca was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I got it doing my job." "That's all you need to know." Yates nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I think you're an excellent instructor. The best I've had. And I don't care what anyone says about you." Something in Becca's chest loosened slightly. "Thank you, Lieutenant. That means more than you know." The midterm evaluation came in the 6th week. Each student had to demonstrate proficiency in a series of maneuvers, including stall recovery, emergency procedures, and formation flying. Becca sat in the evaluator's seat, clipboard in hand, watching her students perform. Chen did well, smooth and confident. Rodriguez was solid, if unspectacular. Yates struggled with the formation flying, but recovered nicely. Morrison, predictably, pushed the envelope. He flew aggressively, showing off his skills, coming within feet of violating the safety margins, but he didn't cross the line. He had learned his lesson. Becca gave him a passing grade, but barely. When he asked why he hadn't scored higher, she was blunt, "Because you're still flying like you have something to prove. Good pilots don't need to prove anything. They just need to do the job." Morrison's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Understood, ma'am." That evening, Becca was working late in her office when she heard raised voices in the hallway. She opened her door and saw Morrison arguing with Captain Mitchum. "Not fair," Morrison was saying. "She's got it out for me. Everyone knows she washed out of combat ops because she couldn't handle the pressure." "That's enough, Lieutenant," Mitchum said, but he was smirking. Becca stepped into the hallway. "Lieutenant Morrison." "Captain Mitchum." "Is there a problem?" Morrison turned red. "No, ma'am, no problem." "Good. Morrison, you're dismissed." "Mitchum, a word." Morrison fled. Mitchum sauntered over, still smirking. "What was that about?" Becca asked quietly. "Nothing. Just letting off steam. You know how students are." "I know how instructors are," Becca said. "And I know you've been spreading rumors about me." Mitchum's smirk faded. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Becca stepped closer. "Let me be very clear, Captain. I don't care what you think about me. I don't care what stories you tell. But if you undermine my authority with my students again, I will file a formal complaint. Is that understood?" For a moment, Mitchum looked angry. Then he shrugged. "Whatever you say, Captain. But you might want to ask yourself why everyone is so curious about your past. Maybe if you weren't so secretive, people wouldn't have to speculate." He walked away before Becca could respond. She stood in the hallway for a long time, her hands clenched into fists, fighting the urge to scream. That night, Becca couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Mitchum's words. Maybe if you weren't so secretive, people wouldn't have to speculate. Was he right? Should she just tell the truth and be done with it? But every time she thought about telling the story, something in her chest tightened. The memories were still too raw, too painful, and she knew from experience that the truth wouldn't stop the gossip. It would just give people more ammunition. She reached for her phone and pulled up Danny's photo. Her brother grinned at her from the screen, full of life and hope. "I miss you," she whispered to the image. "I wish you were here." Danny didn't answer. He never would again. Becca set down the phone and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be another day of teaching, another day of whispers, another day of pretending the scar on her face didn't carry the weight of 1,000 painful memories. But she would endure. She always did. That's what soldiers did. Part 3. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October. During what should have been a routine training flight, Becca was flying with Lieutenant Chen, working on advanced instrument approaches. The weather was marginal, low clouds, light rain, just enough to make things interesting without being dangerous. Perfect conditions for instrument training. They were on their second approach when Chen made a critical error. He misread an altitude call-out and descended below the minimum safe altitude. "Altitude," Becca barked. "Chen, check your altitude." Chen's head snapped to the altimeter. His eyes went wide. "Oh, God, my controls," Becca said, taking over. She pulled the stick back smoothly but firmly, adding power, climbing away from the terrain below. The ground proximity warning had started blaring. They had been less than 300 feet above the hills, with visibility barely a quarter mile. Another 5 seconds and they would have flown into the ground. Chen was breathing hard, his hands shaking. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm so sorry. We'll debrief on the ground," Becca said, keeping her voice calm. "Right now, I need you to focus. We're going to fly the approach again, and you're going to do it correctly. Ma'am, I don't know if I can—" "You can, and you will. Because if you don't learn from this mistake, you'll make it again. And next time, there might not be an instructor in the back seat to save you." She talked Chen through the approach, step by step, until he completed it successfully. When they landed, Chen was pale and sweating. "I could have killed us," he said as they walked back to the hangar. "Yes," Becca agreed. "You could have, but you didn't. You made a mistake, you recognized it, and you corrected it. That's how you learn. How do you stay so calm?" Chen asked. "When things go wrong, I mean. Don't you get scared?" Becca stopped walking. She looked at the young lieutenant, remembering herself at his age. Remembering a different flight, a different mistake, a different outcome. "I get scared," she said quietly. "But fear is just information. It tells you there's danger. What you do with that information is what matters." Chen nodded slowly. "Thank you, ma'am, for saving us and for giving me another chance. Don't thank me yet. We still have to file the incident report. The incident report triggered a safety review." Major Blackwell called Becca into his office that afternoon, along with the chief flight safety officer, a lieutenant colonel named Rawlings. "Walk me through what happened," Rawlings said, his expression neutral. Becca recounted the flight in detail, taking care not to exaggerate or minimize Chen's mistake. When she finished, Rawlings made some notes on his tablet. "Lieutenant Chen will need additional training before he continues," Rawlings said. "But based on your account, Captain Holland, you handled the situation appropriately. Quick reactions, good judgment. That's why we have instructors in the back seat." "Thank you, sir." "However," Rawlings paused, "there's been some concern raised about your fitness as an instructor." Becca felt her stomach drop. "Sir, several instructors have expressed worry that you might be too aggressive in your teaching methods, that you push students too hard." Who said that? Becca asked. That's not relevant. It's absolutely relevant, Becca interrupted. Someone is questioning my competence, and I have a right to know who. Major Blackwell shifted uncomfortably. Captain Holland, is this about Morrison? Becca asked. Because I wrote him up for violating safety protocols? This is about a pattern of behavior, Rawlings said firmly. Multiple instructors have reported that you're difficult to work with, that you're secretive, defensive, and that you intimidate students. That's ridiculous, Becca said, her voice rising. I'm doing my job. I'm teaching these students to stay alive. If that makes me difficult, then I'm guilty as charged. Captain, I understand you're frustrated. Do you? Becca stood up. Do you understand what it's like to have your every decision questioned? To have people gossip about you behind your back, making up stories about why you're here? I've done nothing wrong. I've followed every regulation, every protocol, and yet I'm the one being investigated? Sit down, Captain, Rawlings said, his voice hardening. That's an order. Becca sat, her jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Rawlings studied her for a long moment. I'm going to be direct with you, Captain Holland. There's a perception problem here. Fair or not, people have questions about you. About your past. About that scar on your face. And until those questions are answered, some people aren't going to trust you. My past is my business. Not when it affects your ability to do your job, Rawlings said. Look, I've read your file. I know you're a decorated combat pilot. I know you've earned the right to wear that uniform. But perception matters in the military. And right now, the perception is that you're hiding something. Becca felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Is there anything else, sir? Rawlings sighed. No, you're dismissed. But, Captain, think about what I said. Becca walked out of the building in a daze. She felt like the walls were closing in, like no matter what she did, it would never be enough. She found herself at the base chapel, a small white building at the edge of the base. She hadn't been to church in years, not since Danny's funeral, but right now she needed somewhere quiet to think. The chapel was empty. Becca sat in a pew near the back, her hands folded in her lap, and let herself cry. She cried for Danny, who had died too young. She cried for the career she had lost. She cried for the injustice of being punished for doing her job well, but most of all, she cried because she was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of proving herself, tired of carrying the weight of other people's judgment. Rough day? Becca looked up to see the base chaplain, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Major Sarah Pierce had been at Randolph for 5 years and had a reputation for being a good listener. You could say that, Becca said, wiping her eyes. Want to talk about it? Becca shook her head. Talking doesn't change anything. Maybe not, Major Pierce said, sitting down beside her. But it might make you feel less alone. For a moment, Becca considered staying silent. But something about the chaplain's presence made her feel safe. And she was so tired of carrying this burden alone. Everyone thinks they know who I am, Becca said quietly. They look at my scar and they make up stories. And the truth is so much worse than anything they've imagined. Want to tell me the truth? Major Pierce asked, and so Becca did. She told the chaplain about Danny, her younger brother, who had joined the army and deployed to Afghanistan. She told her about the patrol that went wrong, about the IED that killed 2 soldiers and wounded 3 others, including Danny. She told her about flying to Germany to see him in the hospital, about holding his hand while he lay in a coma, about praying for him to wake up. And she told her about the day the doctors said there was no more hope, about signing the papers to remove life support, about watching her baby brother die. I stayed in Germany for the funeral, Becca said, her voice thick. Then I went back to Afghanistan, back to flying missions, because that's what Danny would have wanted. He always said I was the brave one, but, Major Pierce prompted gently, but I wasn't brave. I was angry, furious, I wanted revenge, so I volunteered for the most dangerous missions. I took risks I shouldn't have taken. And then one day, Becca touched her scar. One day, I took a risk too far. It had been a close air support mission. Troops on the ground under fire, enemy positions on a ridgeline. Becca had made multiple gun runs, taking ground fire each time. On the final run, the situation on the ground was desperate. The ground commander was screaming for help, his men pinned down, casualties mounting. Becca had made a decision. She flew lower than she should have, slower than she should have, getting closer to the enemy positions to ensure her bombs hit their targets. She had saved the men on the ground, but a piece of shrapnel from a near-miss RPG had punched through. The canopy of her F-16 grazed her helmet and carved a furrow in her face from temple to jaw. She had stayed conscious long enough to fly the damaged aircraft back to base. She had landed safely, climbed out of the cockpit, and collapsed from blood loss. The wound had required 63 stitches. The scar was permanent. "The ground commander recommended me for a Silver Star," Becca told Major Pierce. But the wing commander overruled him. Said I had violated flight safety protocols, that I had taken unnecessary risks. So instead of a medal, I got a psychological evaluation and a transfer to a training base. That must have felt like a betrayal, Major Pierce said. It felt like punishment for doing my job. For saving lives, Becca's voice broke. I did everything right, and they still took flying away from me. Major Pierce was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you, Captain Holland?" Becca shrugged. "I see a woman who loved her brother so much that his death nearly destroyed her. I see a woman who channeled her grief into service, who saved lives even at great personal cost. And I see a woman who's been carrying guilt and anger for so long that she's forgotten how to lay them down." "I don't know how," Becca admitted. "Nobody does at first. But I can tell you this. Holding on to that pain won't bring your brother back. And hiding your story won't make the scar go away. Maybe it's time to let people see the truth." All of it, Becca wanted to argue, but she was too tired. And deep down, she knew the chaplain was right. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Major Pierce smiled. "That's all I ask." Part 4. The Truth Revealed. The next morning, Becca woke with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in months. Major Pierce's words had stayed with her through the night, and she knew what she had to do. She couldn't control what people said about her. She couldn't make them stop gossiping or speculating. But she could control her own story. She could tell the truth, on her own terms, and let the chips fall where they may. The question was how. The answer came during her morning class with her students. They were reviewing emergency procedures when Lieutenant Yates raised her hand. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Lieutenant." Yates hesitated, glancing at the other students. "I know this is personal and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I think we'd all like to know the truth about your scar. Not the rumors. The real story." Becca looked at her students. 6 young faces all watching her with genuine curiosity. Not mockery, not judgment, just honest interest. Morrison spoke up. "Ma'am, I know I haven't been respectful. I said some things I shouldn't have. But Lieutenant Yates is right. We'd like to know the truth, if you're willing to tell us." Becca took a deep breath. This was the moment. She could deflect, change the subject, maintain her privacy. Or she could trust these young officers with her story. "All right," she said finally. "But first, I want you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. This is between us, not gossip for the officers' club. Understood?" They all nodded. "Good." Becca pulled up a chair and sat facing them. "The truth is, I got this scar in combat. I was flying a close air support mission in Afghanistan. American soldiers were pinned down and taking casualties. I made a decision to fly lower than regulations allowed to ensure my weapons were accurate. I saved those soldiers' lives, but I took shrapnel to the face in the process." The students were silent, hanging on every word. The Air Force gave me a psychological evaluation and determined I had taken unnecessary risks. They said I was too aggressive, too willing to endanger myself. So they grounded me from combat operations and sent me here. Becca paused. And the reason I was so aggressive, so willing to take risks, was because I was angry. My younger brother had been killed in Afghanistan a few months earlier. I was flying missions like I had nothing to lose, because honestly, I felt like I didn't. Lieutenant Chen spoke quietly. "Your brother was a soldier? Army infantry. He was 19 when he died. IED. Becca's voice was steady now. After he died, I thought the way to honor him was to be fearless, to never back down, to save every soldier I could, no matter the cost. But I was wrong. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing your job anyway, within the bounds of good judgment. Morrison leaned forward. Is that why you wrote me up? When I pushed the envelope? Yes, because I saw myself in you, and I didn't want you to make the same mistakes I did. Becca met his eyes. You're talented, Morrison, but talent without discipline will get you killed. Or worse, it'll get someone else killed. Morrison nodded slowly. I understand now, ma'am. And I'm sorry. For the things I said? Apology accepted. Yates raised her hand again. Ma'am, if you saved those soldiers' lives, why did the Air Force punish you instead of rewarding you? Because I violated regulations. And regulations exist for a reason. Yes, I saved lives that day. But if I had been killed, or if I had crashed in enemy territory, how many resources would have been spent trying to rescue or recover me? How many other lives might have been lost? Becca shook her head. The Air Force made the right call. I just wasn't ready to accept it at the time. The classroom was quiet for a long moment. Then Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke up. Ma'am, for what it's worth, I think you're the best instructor we've had. You push us, but you also care about whether we succeed. And I think we all needed to hear your story. Thank you for trusting us with it. The others murmured agreement. Becca felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you, Lieutenant. Now let's get back to emergency procedures. We've got a lot to cover. That afternoon, Becca was walking across the tarmac when she saw a crowd gathered near the operations building. Something was happening. Something unusual. She approached and saw Colonel Vance, the base commander, standing at a makeshift podium. Major Blackwell was there too, along with several other senior officers, and standing off to the side, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform, was the wing commander, Brigadier General Marcus Coleman. General Coleman was a legend in the Air Force. He had flown F-15s in the First Gulf War, F-16s in Afghanistan and Iraq, and had risen through the ranks through sheer competence and leadership. He was known for being fair, direct, and absolutely unwilling to tolerate politics interfering with the mission. What was he doing at Randolph? Colonel Vance stepped up to the microphone. Attention on deck, she announced. The crowd snapped to attention as General Coleman walked to the podium. At ease, he said, his voice carrying across the tarmac. I'm here today for two reasons. First, to address some rumors that have been circulating on this base. And second, to correct an injustice. Becca's heart started pounding. Was this about her? 6 months ago, General Coleman continued, Captain Rebecca Holland was flying a close air support mission in Afghanistan. American soldiers were under heavy fire and taking casualties. The situation was desperate. Captain Holland made a decision to engage the enemy at extremely close range, accepting significant personal risk to ensure her weapons were accurate. She saved the lives of 7 soldiers that day. She also sustained a significant injury in the process. The crowd had gone completely silent. Following that mission, Captain Holland was given a psychological evaluation. The conclusion was that she had taken unnecessary risks and should be temporarily removed from combat operations. I disagreed with that assessment. But at the time, I was overruled by higher command. General Coleman paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled officers and airmen. What you don't know, what Captain Holland doesn't know, is that I've spent the last 6 months fighting to overturn that decision. I've reviewed the mission footage. I've interviewed the soldiers she saved. I've consulted with flight surgeons, psychologists, and senior combat pilots. And the conclusion is unanimous. Captain Holland acted with courage, sound judgment, and extraordinary skill under extreme pressure. Becca felt tears welling up. She tried to blink them back, but they came anyway. Captain Holland, General Coleman said, looking directly at her. Front and center. Becca's legs felt like jelly, but she marched forward and stood at attention in front of the general. Captain Rebecca Holland, General Coleman said formally. By order of the Secretary of the Air Force, you are hereby awarded the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. He pinned the medal to her uniform, as the crowd erupted in applause. Additionally, General Coleman continued, raising his voice to be heard, you are hereby reinstated to full flight status. Effective immediately, you are assigned to the 36th Fighter Squadron at Osan Air Base, Korea. Report date is 30 days from today. Becca couldn't stop the tears now. Sir, Thank you, sir. General Coleman smiled. Don't thank me, Captain. You earned this. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry it took so long. He shook her hand, and the crowd applauded again. Later, in the privacy of her quarters, Becca sat on her bed and looked at the silver star in her hands. The metal gleamed in the afternoon light, a small piece of metal that represented so much more than its physical weight. There was a knock on her door. She opened it to find her 6 students standing in the hallway. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Yates said, "we wanted to congratulate you and to say thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For being honest with us," Morrison said. "For showing us what real courage looks like." "We're going to miss you, ma'am." Becca smiled through her tears. "I'm going to miss you, too." "All of you, but I know you're going to be great pilots. Just remember what I taught you." "Yes, ma'am," they said in unison. After they left, Becca packed her belongings methodically. Everything had to fit in 2 duffel bags and a footlocker. She had learned to travel light over the years. She was folding her uniforms when her phone rang. It was Major Pierce, the chaplain. "I heard the news," Pierce said warmly. "Congratulations, Captain. You deserve this." "Thank you, Major, and thank you for the advice. You were right. About all of it. I'm glad I could help. What are you going to do now?" Becca looked at the photo of Danny on her nightstand. Her brother grinned up at her, forever young, forever hopeful. "I'm going to fly," she said. "I'm going to do the job I was meant to do. And I'm going to honor my brother by being the best damn pilot the Air Force has." "I have no doubt you will be," Pierce said. The day before Becca left Randolph, she went back to the officers' club one last time. She wanted to face the place where she had first heard the cruel whispers, where the gossip had started. She walked in and ordered a Coke at the bar. Several officers were there, including Captain Mitchum. When he saw her, his expression flickered between embarrassment and something that might have been respect. "Captain Holland," he said, walking over. "I owe you an apology. A real one. I was wrong about you. About everything." Becca studied him for a moment. Then she extended her hand. "Apology accepted, Captain." They shook hands. It wasn't friendship, but it was a start. As she left the club, Becca touched her scar lightly. For years, she had hated this mark on her face. It had been a symbol of everything she had lost: her brother, her combat career, her confidence. But now she saw it differently. The scar wasn't a mark of shame. It was a reminder of the price of courage. It was proof that she had been willing to risk everything to save others. And it was a promise to herself that she would never stop fighting for what was right, no matter the cost. 30 days later, Captain Rebecca Holland stood on the flight line at Osan Air Base in South Korea. In front of her was an F-16 Fighting Falcon, its gray paint gleaming in the morning sun. Her F-16. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the smooth metal under her palm. This was where she belonged. In the cockpit. In the fight, the crew chief, a young sergeant, climbed down from the cockpit. "She's all yours, ma'am." "Ready when you are." Becca climbed the ladder and settled into the seat. The cockpit wrapped around her like a glove, every switch and dial familiar and comforting. She ran through the pre-flight checklist automatically, her hands moving with practiced ease. "Tower, this is Viper 2-1, requesting taxi clearance." "Viper 2-1, you're cleared to taxi." "Welcome back to the fight, Captain Holland," Becca smiled. "Welcome back indeed." She taxied to the runway, advanced the throttle, and felt the familiar surge of power as the F-16 accelerated. The world blurred past, faster and faster, until the moment when the wheels left the ground and she was flying again, free. As she climbed into the clear blue sky, Becca thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The loss of her brother, the scar on her face, the months of doubt and struggle. The truth revealed, all of it had been necessary. All of it had made her who she was, and who she was, she realized, was exactly who she was meant to be: a fighter pilot, a leader, a survivor, someone who had been mocked for her scars until the world learned what those scars really meant, that she had bled for something greater than herself. As the ground fell away below her and the sky opened up above, Rebecca Holland smiled. She was home,